guys, welcome back and thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Colored In podcast. I'm your host, Nai. That's NAI because I'm new and insightful. Oop, there's a little switch up. Okay, so in the spirit of this being the first episode for season 2, I'm going to be doing a little recap on what this podcast is about for any of my new listeners out there. For my OGs, y'all already know how we hold it down here for the crew. But for my newbies, let this be the first official welcome to the crew. Crew, CREW, is an acronym detailing the 4 themes that this podcast is focused on. I know I mentioned it in season 1 that I may want to change the acronym around, but I decided not to because I feel like I have a good thing going here, so I'm going to try and stick with it. And again, for my newbies, CREW stands for Culture and Careers, Relationships, Education, and Wellness. And basically, I thought up these themes with my best friend and mentor when we were brainstorming on how I wanted to narrow down the focus for my platform and also kind of give me the opportunity to talk about any and everything. So that's my little spiel. If you're interested in the longer story, and trust me, it is way longer, be sure to check out episode 1 of season 1, Coloring in My Why. And while you're there, check out all the other episodes too. Be sure to connect with us on Instagram at _colored_in. Send in your feedback, and this time, leave us some voice notes of your opinions and thoughts on our episodes. And we're starting off our first episode with the letter C, focused on culture. And today, I'm lucky enough to have 2 guests here with me. So first off, we have Kofi.
Hey, I'm Kofi. I'm a third-year law student at New York Law School. I'm from the Bronx, and my favorite food is jollof.
Okay. And last but not least, we have a very familiar voice for you guys. You may recognize him from my last season because he was featured on episode 4, Relationships Mansplaining. If you have not heard that yet, please go check that out. But of course, last but not least, we have Jesse.
Hi guys, good to be back.
So our first topic for this episode, we're going to be talking about immigrant privilege, and even more so, the secondhand effects that it has on on immigrant children. My parents are 2 immigrants who migrated to America in the 1980s. And yeah, I think, it probably set me up for success in ways that I didn't expect, especially with the mindset that they were able to migrate over with. So this whole idea of immigrant privilege, this whole concept, I actually want to kick it over to one of my guests for him to kind of go in on what he feels like it is or what he theorizes it to be. So, Kofi, kick it off.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think the idea came up more was like as I was going through like high school and college and other like higher education areas. I started to look around my colleagues and my like other like African descendant students, and I found to see that a lot of them were like Caribbean American or descendants of like African immigrants. And I started to think, I wonder why. At first, I thought it was like something like that had to do with like just strictly like how in our cultures or like how immigrant cultures they like really push their children to be like really successful and really work hard in school. But then I started to theorize and realize maybe it has something to do with how we're not like direct descendants of slaves from the United States. Maybe it has something to do with that. Maybe we somehow maybe missed or escaped some of the systemic racism and things that have been used to keep Black people down for generations in America. So I was thinking maybe that's some of the reason why you see a lot of African immigrant children being successful or Caribbean immigrant children being successful in America or like having quote unquote American success, is because we didn't really have to deal with like a lot of our generations missed some of the issues that have been affecting African Americans for years, such as like the prison industrial system, like redlining, things that we kind of just came in at a time where Black people in America were starting to gain some sort of freedom, but we're sort of avoiding some of those issues that plagued us for a long time.
Right. So almost like we did not get the terrible, like the impact of like slavery, of the prison system, of redlining, like you said, like as since our parents came at a time where those things were slowly but surely being eradicated, the impact that it had on the Black American mindset who were there during the 50s and the 60s fighting for justice, fighting for their civil rights, because we kind of because our parents came at a time where that struggle wasn't really present, or at least it wasn't as pervasive and for as it was for people who were here during the 50s and the 60s. They were able to kind of have a sense of value and ethics in success in education that they were able to pass along to their children that, let's say, the Black American
Yeah,
probably
not
like lost
not
on.
only that, yeah, maybe they believe a little more in like the idea of an American dream.
Right.
Like I feel like after generations of seeing people in your family being cast away by America's like systems
System.
that have kept them down,
Mm-hmm.
you start to lose faith in it. But like as an African immigrant, you you only see what has happened in your own country, or if you're a Caribbean immigrant, you've only seen what happened in your country as of there's no opportunity here. I'm coming to a country that has quote unquote opportunities, that have the facilities to help me like become a functioning member of society. So like maybe that's something that does help us as people who are first generation students. I don't know.
Yeah, I think just to add on, like, my father is immigrant from Ghana, and just the cultural differences that I've seen. And my mom is African American, right? She's just black, so the cultural differences I've seen on both sides, and also how you'll see that a lot of immigrant Caribbean African parents, I think there's some sort of a judgment sometimes on African American people. My dad would always say like, "Don't be like those kids in the street." And I know what kind of kids he was talking about, right? When you think of the model African person, chances are they're an immigrant who gets good grades, hangs out with other immigrant people, aren't doing street things, aren't involved in rap music, stuff like that. There's just a cultural difference, and I think that helps to keep the immigrant offspring on a more like tighter path that doesn't lead them to distract themselves and falter their success.
For immigrants, so to speak, we don't see America as a dead end. If anything, I would argue we would see it as the land of opportunity. Whereas for the Black American who has been impacted by a terrible slave era and all the terrible laws that came from that, they kind of lack that vision, so to
Mm-hmm.
speak. So then, could we hypothesize that, let's say, a Black American who migrates to another country, like let's say someone who was fighting for their rights in the 50s and the 60s, migrated to Europe, would they have that same immigrant privilege?
I'm not sure, and I don't really know how that would end up.
Right.
It seems like from what we're saying, maybe, but I don't think so. I don't know.
I, wouldn't it? I think it depends because that country that they're migrating to would have to have the same kind of history that would
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
otherwise like hold that specific type of person back.
Right.
And I think
Right.
few countries have America's dark history of slavery. So
Yeah.
I think it is very important for immigrants and children of immigrants to acknowledge that, hey, like my father wasn't in prison, my grandfather wasn't in prison. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? So for me, right, they're coming from their homeland with nothing. They're able to like scrape their money together, find a home, and then we have an opportunity to now go to school and change the entire economic landscape for our generations after us. Black people can't do that, or it's a lot harder for them to do that. Just regular African Americans, if they've been in America for so long, they have no idea of what that looks like, as Kofi said.
Right. Yeah, I think there's like you said, America has a really dark history, and what they're really good at is kind of concealing that history and making it seem like nothing happened. But is there a chance, or could there be a way where people can kind of transcend or like just go beyond that kind of dark history that they grew up with or that they know of? Like, I don't believe that it's the end all, like this is the end for all Black Americans. Obviously there are a lot of
Yeah.
successful Black Americans who went through all of this and they still made it out on top. And what we're saying here is that we just kind of have it a little bit easier because we were able to skip all of that.
And it's not to say like African people don't face racism, of
Mhm.
course, in this
Right.
country, because we still do, of course. But I just feel like we have to understand what space we take in the whole, like, because the Black community is very diverse.
Yeah.
And it's like there's different people coming from different all different other places. So we definitely have to understand what opportunity we've been given here, and definitely align with the other people in our Black community to really make sure that for the advancement of the whole race. So because if we continue the mindset of our parents where it's like, don't be like them, like how Jesse was saying, or like don't act in this certain way, then we're kind of perpetrating some of the things that are bringing down African Americans and Black people in this country. So it's definitely something that we have to be cognizant of, understand what our quote unquote privilege is, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And so I guess what I would say, I would describe privilege here in the sense of an advantage, obviously, but also in the sense that we have different needs from other Black people in the Black culture. So like maybe like I don't need to be me specifically as like a child of an immigrant who is very adamant on education, very adamant on success, not willing to like put up with failure. Like my mother, like you come with a bad grade in her house, like don't even, right? Because like she will not stand for that.
Yeah.
So maybe I don't need an extra push or an extra like pat on the back to tell me, hey, you can do it, hey, you can succeed, because I know that when I come home I don't have no other choice but to. Whereas someone else who wasn't lucky enough, or I don't know how to call that lucky, but someone else who did not have that similar upbringing kind of sees success and failure on the same plane, on the same playing field, and they might be able to accept success just as willingly as they would be able to accept failure, because there's no loss or gain from it. So I think what we can acknowledge in our privilege here is just understanding that we have different needs or different motivations that can contribute to earlier success.
But I'm curious as to where the difference in those values come from, and why is this such a stark line down the middle when you're talking about immigrant households versus just African American households, right? Because I don't want to believe that African American parents aren't pushing their kids to do their homework and to get an education.
Right.
But you see that the ones that do make it to the finish line like tend to be of immigrant descent. So I wonder what that is, like what that X factor is missing.
I think I would speculate and say that like it's not necessarily just down to the parents, but to the environment as well. Like they always say, like it takes a village to raise a kid. So it's like you being a child of an immigrant, you're around other immigrants who have that same mindset, who have that same ethic and value system. So like it's not just your mom who's telling you to get good grades. It's your aunt, it's your uncle. It's they're putting you against your cousins and like, hey, well, your cousin got an A, so why are you bringing me a B plus? Like it's that whole kind of family village system that's reinforcing that ideal. Whereas for Black Americans that do not have like that immigration status, you know, it might be their mother that's drilling at them. So I think they have more of an opportunity to get different dissenting voices that at least tells them different avenues are possible. And sadly, those avenues can lead to a path that does not include education, doesn't include generational wealth, and, you know, like fill any other, like any positive word can fill up that sentence.
Actually, I think that in my experience, I feel like immigrant kids might have that extra chip on their shoulder in terms of how they're seen by other people. Because not only are you Black, if you're a Black immigrant, but you're an immigrant, so people think like their parents came from this country, came to this country, they were poor, they don't know the language, so I think it gives us a different or an advantage, I think, in the eyes of teachers or those around us, because we're being put on this pedestal for being first generation and having these perceived other obstacles, which is why when I first heard about this whole idea that there could be a privilege behind it, it was so weird because I only thought as being an immigrant or being a first generation kid as a disadvantage. Right. I didn't realize that it's kind of just in your face.
It's crazy because there's like 300 years that we just didn't really see, so it ended up being an advantage in a way because avoiding all those crazy issues that have like affected Black Americans in United States is like it definitely can be an advantage, I would say, because then you wouldn't feel as hopeless with this with the system we have right now.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that. So if we're coming here now, so like let's use the year 2020, right? You come here now and you can make a different life for yourself now as an immigrant. That means that conceivably Black Americans that have been here since, you know, they were slaves can also at this point in time make a difference in their lives.
Yes.
And it only leads me to leave because we have the same access to resources, and because we're still seen as just black to white people in the masses, that there has to be like a key cultural difference that's keeping the Americans versus the immigrants behind. And I just want us to know what y'all think of that, or in your experiences, like growing up as first generation kids, were there things that you guys couldn't do or were made to do that other black kids, you know?
Funny thing, my sister was talking about like she goes to Cornell. Well, she just graduated.
Woo woo.
Yeah, and she was telling me like how there was like a whole like there was like a split between the black students in her school
Oh wow.
over like an argument that some African American students said were saying that the Cornell and other Ivy Leagues aren't taking as many African American students, and they're only taking students who are first generation. And I was wondering, maybe is that like a pedestal thing? They're like, these students are like the top students, and they're not seeing African American students on the same level as first generation students. So there was a whole argument there. There was like a like just a disagreement of like African students who believe, of course, they deserve this spot because their family struggled too in some certain sense because they're first generation, their family didn't have much,
Right.
but their struggle is completely different from a person who's the direct descendant of slavery. So it's kind of like, how do we reconcile both these struggles?
Like, who's the Malcolm X, who's the MLK?
No,
This argument. Honestly, I feel like in terms of cultural differences, if I had to like think back about it, I always felt like being from an immigrant family, I always had something to prove, right? Like I always had to come in and be like, no, I can assimilate, or no, I can embrace my differences, or no, I can, and then insert whatever word is there. Like I always had to like be on my toes, be on the pins and needles so that I can kind of show everyone that I deserved that spot. Whereas I felt like my other counterparts, as in students or peers or friends who did not come from an immigrant family, didn't really necessarily have that in their mindset. Like they were always off, everyone always feels at a time where they feel like they need to kind of like, where they have imposter syndrome and they feel like, no, like I deserve to be here, but they kind of struggle and with that thought. But that was like always at the forefront. Like whenever I'm stepping into a room, I don't care if it's full of white people, I don't care if it's full of black people, you're gonna know by before I leave that there was a reason why I was put into that room. And that was all throughout college, all throughout school, all throughout like work, even in my work here right now. So I think if like, I don't know if that's a cultural difference, but I do think that's something that's more pervasive amongst immigrant families than non-immigrant families.
Do you think it could be limiting though? I feel like my parents are always big in investing in education and like really like whenever I needed something for school, they'd buy it. But like if I wanted like a hobby or something,
Right?
Yeah.
Like, I didn't get a console until I was like 18. I had to buy that myself.
Damn.
So
Yeah.
my parents aren't. They won't hear it if it's something else that has nothing to do with education. Like I wanted to join the soccer team. My dad was like, "Why would you want to?"
Right, you
And
could
he's
have
a
been the
soccer-
next.
yeah.
Yo, you could have
And
been
he's-
our next soccer player.
Yeah, and he was a big soccer fan, so it was like really weird for me to hear like a person who was like all about soccer and how they love playing it, not even want to like truly be about it. He was always like school first, no matter what. Like I don't know.
I want to like the word I'm thinking of is mindset. Like I think both of you mentioned the word, and I remember my dad had said something about like this immigrant mindset where when you come to this country, you want to do what you can with the resources that you have to make the best life for you and your family. While he described like a lot of American mindsets are more so kind of rooted towards the American dream and are a little bit rooted towards entitlement, where we've been here, we've had this ugly history as slaves in America. We black people are constantly comparing ourselves in the proximity of white people and what white success looks like. So we feel like we deserve things just for what we've been through. And because of that, that leads people not to work as hard. Like hard work is not valued as much. And my mom, who's African American, has been told that she has like an immigrant mindset in that she grew up poor, same kind of like issues, but used her resources and kind of played the system so that she could end up providing for her family, making it out the hood and making it out of poverty. Yeah, I don't know what you guys think about that if you've seen that in your experiences.
I mean, to both of you guys' point, so like Kofi, yeah, like anything outside of education or like something that I could put on my resume, my 10-year-old resume, anything that couldn't go on that, my mother was not having it. She was just like, she's like dead all of that. Like, I don't want to hear it. It wasn't until my older sister started like kind of convincing her like no, she needs to be able to express herself, she needs to be able to be creative and all that stuff, because that would also contribute to her academic success, that my mom started to loosen the reins a little bit and kind of let me venture into more artistic, creative, hobby-ish type leisures. Like it was a whole mess, man. Anyway, I'm not about to get into my childhood history. But yeah, so I totally agree. I think it could be very limiting in the idea of like, people are good at different things. I hate when people get pigeonholed into this type of person. Like, oh, you're good with math, accountant. Oh, you're good at this, chemist, science, doctor, lawyer, whatever. There are only three fields that exist to Caribbean parents.
Right.
Lawyer, doctor, and accountant, engineer. Like, you only got those 4 options to choose from for your career. Everything else is non-existent. So I always hated that idea of like being pigeonholed, but that's what they do essentially when they kind of put the focus on education and nothing else. So I absolutely agree that there is a limiting factor in it. It was probably why like a lot of people miss out on being creative and on being artists and kind of exploring that route. And when they finally do it, they go crazy.
Yeah.
They go nuts. They're buying everything that's brand new. They're like doing the foolishness of everything because they know that they weren't able to access that as a child. And I think that can manifest in different ways for different people. But yeah, I completely agree with that. And then on the whole immigrant versus non-immigrant mindset, I don't know. It sounds right. Like, it sounds like it makes sense. But I almost feel like, isn't it also kind of warranted? Like, yeah, we've had a very dark history. My grandmother was a slave. My great-grandmother was a slave. And it's just like, yeah, if I don't want to work and bust out a 12 to 16-hour workday just to get somewhere and just to feed my kids, I kind of feel like that's a little bit fair. That if they're kind of tired at that point, to keep working for it and to keep going for it. Not to say that it will work, because if the system isn't built for that to happen, then it's just not going to happen. And yeah, they'll get stuck in that mindset. But I don't know if they're necessarily wrong for kind of being fed up and be like, yeah, I'm not about to pull up with a 16-hour workday only for it to maybe not even be helpful or work towards something that can be successful for my kids.
Right.
Yeah.
I do have one more question.
You with the questions.
Around the idea of like what Kofi is saying earlier about reconciling the two, parts of like immigrant kids and like African American kids. So when I first heard about the idea of immigrant privilege, I'm like, okay, this is fascinating to me. But I was kind of stuck on what to do with it because it was a new topic. But at the same time, I'm struggling with the fact that I also feel like it's not that much of a privilege in how it's manifested in my life, and that I grew up alongside these same people and got to the same place kind of thing. So I guess what would you tell immigrant kids after giving them this information that they might have a privilege? Like, what would they do with that information, and how should they use that to reconcile maybe relationships with other non-immigrant kids?
I feel like we all have to realize that we're all against the white supremacy. I think that's the first part.
Rule number 1, don't like the white man.
Yeah, exactly. And like, try not to come at different cultures. Like, I feel like a lot of, I don't know if you guys heard of a big thing in African culture is calling something a kata, which is like acting like a black person, or like so there's like internalized racism in Africa. So it's kind of like we're gonna have to work on that racism that is going on in African communities against black people, because that's not gonna help anyone if especially if we grow up alongside each other. Like, every African community I've been into has been right next to a black community or like a Latino community. So if we have this idea that we're better than someone, it's definitely not gonna help any of us in general. Right. Especially since white people see us all the same.
At least personally for me, hearing about the concept and kind of like being able to acknowledge a little bit about it, it's just that like we can't do it alone. right? Everything or any success that you have or anything that you call success that's within your grasp, it was a result of something else,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's always what it's going to be. Like no one ever got to wherever they are by staying to themselves, not asking for help, looking down on other people, and whatever that narrative is, like that whole like climb the ladder of success, it has to be with other people. You have to have a support system, and in order for you to gain that system, you can't ostracize people. So like Kofi was saying with that internalized racism, it's like, no, a person is not probably struggling because they're not working hard enough or they're not applying themselves enough or anything like that. No, it's because they're probably dealing with a mindset or dealing with a lack of vision that's has been systemically passed down throughout their family and throughout generations as a result of this dark, corrupt history that America has on and for Black people and the Black community.
Yeah.
And then it's a Black community that we were not a part of. We, like, as immigrants, we migrated into that community, but we weren't here, like Kofi said, we weren't here for those last 300 years.
Yeah.
So it's like, and yeah, I mean, we had shit going on in our old, in our countries back then, and we're fighting for independence. I think for my country specifically, we didn't get like independence until like the 1930s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so like we were going through our stuff back at the thing, but the idea is that we escaped. They didn't. And we need to be able to understand that and kind of reconcile that with each other so that when we understand that some people are going to be at a disadvantage and it's not going to be easy to see. It's like one of those invisible disabilities.
Yeah. Right. And another thing maybe that was like we have to understand that the rights that African Americans fought for are some of the rights that we're like enjoying now, like affirmative action and like just the fact that we could be in the same areas and schools as white people. That's something that we didn't fight for.
They did that.
They did that. So like we kind of are benefiting from these battles that African Americans have been fighting for hundreds of years. So understanding that, I feel like that will definitely help out in terms of like fighting that internalized racism that we've had.
No, well said. And just to echo both of those things, I think acknowledgement is probably just the key word for me, and that's like what I had to walk away with. Like I didn't want to feel bad about the fact that I'd had this shortcut, almost to kind of get to where I was academically, but just acknowledging that it's not without somebody's cause. You know what I'm saying? Like it was because of the Black African Americans before me that helped me to get to where I am, and it was because my parents were immigrants that it kind of helped me to escape a lot of the difficulties that a lot of African Americans are going through. And also, I think there needs to be a little bit more empathy for African American culture coming from the immigrants as well. I think that there's so much judgment on them, and it's like, oh, they can't get ahead because of the music they listen to, and it glorifies drugs and violence. But that culture plays a big part in Black people in America, and it helps them to get through the hard times that they've been through to keep fighting. So I just think a more holistic vision of all of this kind of stuff will kind of help us reconcile the two.
We all have kind of invisible disabilities here and there. We all have invisible privileges here and there. And the idea is to kind of take a step back and be holistic about who you're interacting with and how you're interacting with them. And always understand and know that, like, we're never only for ourselves. You need to be able to stick your hand out and extend it towards the person behind you, the person in front of you. And just, we need to keep kind of working towards pulling each other up as opposed to working against each other to get to the top. So I want to thank Jesse and Kofi for taking the time out today and helping us out, helping us talk about this conversation, which I think is a pretty difficult conversation to have. Y'all might not think that because they sound so articulate, and I'm over here with like a little accent or something because I'm, from the hood or whatever. But this is a very complex topic to talk about, and I would encourage you guys to bring it back to your friends, immigrants or not. And just kind of see what they think about it. See if it's something that they can acknowledge. See if it's a theory that they can sympathize with. And hopefully that can create a bigger environment for this conversation to be had. So again, thank you guys.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, thank me. And that's it for today, crew. So thank you guys for listening. Be sure to share this episode with your friends so that they can join the crew. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and now YouTube. You can connect with us on Instagram at _collared_in. Be sure to leave us your thoughts. I'm excited to hear from you guys and can't wait to speak with you soon. Bye.